Policemen sent the fat man wait outside, unaware that he was the judge, and what happened later left everyone in shock. "Hey, Gordo, you can't come in here. Wait out with the other suspects." The words of policeman Mike Reeves echoed through the court corridor like a slap in the face. Robert Chen, 52, stopped at the entrance and felt all his eyes turn to him. Its dark suit was impeccable, your leather paste well cared for, but none of that mattered. For the policeman, he was just another fat man who didn't deserve respect. The main corridor of the Riverside Court of Justice was sealing movement that Tuesday morning. Lawyers ran with their piles of documents, nervous families awaited news, and secretaries organized processes. It was the kind of chaotic morning Mike Reeves loved it. A lot of people to impress, a lot of authority to demonstrate. But all this agitation stopped when he decided to do his power show. "Sorry, official, but I need—" Robert started with calm voice, adjusting the glasses discreetly. There was something in the way he said, a perfect diction, a careful vocabulary that contrasted strangely with the humiliating situation in which he was. "I don't care what you need," Mike interrupted, pushing his chest out like a proud peacock. "Look at the size of this belly. You must be here for some bar or traffic fight. People like you always get a problem. Always." Mike Reeves was 28 years old and only 2 years of police experience, but his arrogance compensated for his inexperience in abundance. The son of a veteran police officer, he grew up believing that the badge gave him the right to judge anyone for his appearance, and Robert, with his 120 pounds and modest appearance, seemed the perfect target for a public demonstration of power. The embarrassing silence took over the corridor. Margaret Walsh, a 35-year-old criminalist lawyer who was just a few meters away, lowered her eyes with the shame of others. The secretaries stopped typing, pretending not to see the scene. A group of law trainees whispered, clearly uncomfortable but without the courage to interfere. "Seriously, man," Mike continued, now speaking louder to make sure everyone hears. He loved to have an audience. "You look like a hamburger at breakfast. I bet you don't even know why you're here, don't you? What kind of problem did you bring to our court today?" Some nerve laughs echoed through the hall. Robert watched every face around. Some seemed embarrassed by the situation. Others clearly had fun with the show. It was always like this. Society loved a good spectacle when the victim was someone they considered different or inferior. An older secretary, Sandra Martinez, muttered softly to her colleague, "This is not right," but his voice was drowned out by the laughs of some law students who found the situation hilarious. Robert noticed everything, every reaction, every person who chose to laugh or silence. His memory was photographic, a talent that few suspected. 3 years ago, Robert had reached that small town coming from San Francisco, where he built a brilliant career in court, but no one there I knew that yet. For them, he was just an unimportant fat stranger, and perhaps it was exactly that perception he hated most. Not the fatophobia itself, but people's mental laziness to judge a book by the cover. "I understand your concern for security," Robert replied, his voice keeping a professional tone that intrigued some gifts. Margaret Walsh looked up, surprised. There was something in the way he articulated the words, a natural authority that didn't match the humiliation he was suffering at all. "Concern? Ha!" Mike laughed loudly, making sure everyone heard. "My only concern is to keep bums away from where they should not be. Go out and wait for it, and you may take a walk if you understand me. I would do well for your health." More laughs. This time, even some junior lawyers smiled discreetly, that kind of cowardly smile from those who laugh not to become the next target. Robert closed his eyes for a second, not in shame, but something Mike Reeves could not play. It was patience. The patience of someone who had seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended. "At least he looks polite," Sandra whispered to her colleague. "More polite than a lot of lawyer here." But his observation was lost in the buzz of laughs and malicious comments that Mike had generated. The policeman was clearly warming up for more humiliation when something strange happened. Robert took a roll out of the inner pocket of the jacket, such a natural and confident movement that some more attentive observers frowned and ho. It was not a movement of someone lost or out of place. It was the movement of someone who knew exactly where he was and why he was there. "Can I ask a question, official?" Robert said, keeping the paper again. "Do you know this court well? He has been working here for a long time?" Mike was momentarily confused by Tom's change, but quickly resumed his arrogance. "Of course I know. I work here for 2 years, Gordo. I know every corner of this place and know exactly who can and who can't enter." "Interesting," Robert murmured, and there was something almost dangerous in the way he said that word. Very, very interesting. What no one knew was that Robert Chen kept a secret that would change everything in that court, and police officer Mike Reeves was about to find out the price of arrogance as humiliating as possible, because in exactly 15 minutes, that fat and unimportant man would need to take his place behind the most important table of that room. Robert adjusted the folder, gave an almost imperceptible smile that froze some more attentive observers, and said only, "We see ourselves soon, Official Reeves." The way he spoke the name, as if he knew exactly who Mike was, made the police hesitate for a second fraction. So calmly, Robert walked towards the exit, but not before he looked at the wall, a look that anyone observing would interpret as a countdown. Margaret Walsh followed his gaze, and something clicked on his mind. 15 minutes. The new judge would arrive in 15 minutes. If you are enjoying this turnaround story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what's going on will let this arrogant policeman crawl with shame in front of everyone. Outside the court, Robert positioned himself near the main entrance, exactly where Mike had sent, but something in his posture drew attention. He didn't seem like a defeated man waiting for his time. It looked like someone who was exactly where he wanted to be, watching each movement through the glass door. Mike Reeves, on the other hand, was at the height of his personal glory. With Robert out of sight, he turned to those present in the corridor as an actor who had just given his best performance. "Did you see this? That's how you deal with penetrators. Firmness and authority." "Dude, you were kind of heavy, don't you think?" David Kim murmured, a young lawyer who had witnessed everything, but his low voice was quickly drowned out by Mike's high laugh. "Heavy? That fat needed to understand his place. I bet it doesn't even have complete high school." Mike adjusted his belt with the equipment, making sure everyone saw his authority. "People just understand in the language you know." Margaret Walsh watched the Robert window stopped outside. There was something disturbing in his calm. Most humiliated people in this way would be visibly shaken, but Robert methodically checked their documents as if reviewing a well-planned strategy. "Do you know what is the problem with this country?" Mike continued, now with a small audience of trainees who listened to him with morbid attention. "People without physical preparation want to enter anywhere. That one must be one of those guys who process restaurant because the chair is too small." Embarrassing laughs echoed by the group. Sandra Martinez, the oldest secretary, shook her head in disapproval but said nothing. She had learned over the years that confronting arrogant police rarely ended well for administrative employees. Outside, Robert noticed the growing movement of cars reaching the parking lot. It was 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes for the beginning of the hearings. He observed a black BMW parking in the reserved vacancy, probably some important lawyer. 2 local journalists had also arrived, cameras in hand. "Interesting. Hey you," Mike's voice echoed through the door. The policeman had gone out to check if Robert was really waiting. "It's still there, Gordon? I thought I had given up and left to look for a McDonald's." Robert raised his eyes from the documents. "I'm exactly where you asked me to stay, Official Reeves." His voice was still calm, professional, but there was something in the tone that made Mike frown involuntarily. "It's official lord for you," Mike replied, approaching with the stewed chest. "And since it's wasting time there, why don't you tell me what's yours? Did you drive drunk? Or something with alimental pension?" The journalists who were organizing their equipment stopped to observe the interaction. Robert noticed his peripheral presence, more pieces positioning himself on the board. "In fact," Robert said, carefully closing his folder, "I'm here for work." The way he spoke these words made something strange happen in Mike's stomach. A twinge of uncertainty he quickly suppressed. "Work? Ha!" Mike laughed loud enough for journalists to hear. "Let me guess. Are you a witness in any discrimination process? Or maybe the defendant?" He turned to journalists with a smug smile. "Guys, you are seeing a perfect example of how we keep the order here." One of the journalists, a middle-aged woman with years of experience, frowned. There was something familiar in the fat man who was being humiliated. She couldn't identify what, but her journalistic intuition was alert. "Official," Robert said, his voice gaining a tone that Margaret Walsh, watching the window, immediately recognized as judicial. "Can I ask a question? How many judges do you know personally in this court?" The question took Mike off guard. "What kind of question is this?" "Of course I know. I work here 2 years ago," I said. "Name them," Robert simply asked. Mike hesitated. The truth was that he was just a security police, had no direct contact with the judges. "I don't need to prove anything to you, Gordo. Go back to your place and get quiet." But something had changed in the dynamics. The journalists were paying more attention. Margaret Walsh had approached the door. Sandra Martinez had stopped pretending to work and watched everything out the window. Robert consulted his watch, a discreet Rolex that Mike had not noticed before. 10 minutes, he murmured as if talking to himself. 10 minutes for what? Mike asked, his voice cheating on a beginning of nervousness. "To get it all over," Robert answered, and for the first time he really smiled. It was not a smile of submission or embarrassment. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. Margaret Walsh felt a shiver. She had seen this kind of smile before, in the mouth of experienced judges moments before making devastating sentences, and suddenly a terrible possibility began to form in his mind. What no one knew was that Robert Chen was not there as a visitor, witness, or defendant. and police officer Mike Reeves was about to find that there are mistakes that can destroy an entire career in minutes. While Mike continued his arrogance show for journalists, Robert walked calmly to a more reserved area of the courtyard. Away from curious eyes, he withdrew his cell phone and dialed a number with the accuracy of who had made that connection hundreds of times. "Sandra, it's Robert." His voice was low, but firm. "Yes, I'm here. We started in 5 minutes." Across the line, Sandra Martinez almost dropped the phone. The oldest secretary of the court immediately recognized the voice she had heard at administrative meetings for months, but had never connected with the man Mike was humiliating. "Lord Chen? My God, I didn't know it was the Lord. Now you know." Robert watched Mike gesturing dramatically to the cameras. "Do I need you to prepare my room? And Sandra, I want you to convene the officer Reeves to attend the first audience of the day. Say it is an urgent security issue." Sandra felt a shiver of pure emotion. After 30 years working in the judiciary, she would finally see justice being done in a poetic way. "It will be a pleasure, you." While Robert organized the last details, Margaret Walsh made a courageous decision. She approached Sandra at the information desk. "That man out there, is there anything I should know?" Sandra looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Margaret, you are a good lawyer. You have always treated everyone with respect." She took a dramatic break. "In 3 minutes, you will witness something you will never forget." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say that the official Reeves has just made the biggest mistake of his career." Sandra smiled in a way that Margaret had never seen before. "And you have a privileged view of what is about to happen." Outside, Mike was completely oblivious to what unfolded. He had found 2 more patrolling police officers and was recounting his victory about Robert with increasingly exaggerated details. "You should have seen his face when I sent him out." Mike laughed loudly. "Like a beaten dog. These fat ones always look like this when someone shows who dates." Robert, now back to the entrance, heard every word, but instead of anger, his face showed something much more dangerous: preparation. He checked his watch again. 2 minutes. Then something happened that made Mike's stomach take a turn. Robert took a small golden key from his pocket, the kind of key that Mike had seen only once before in the hands of the previous judge when he retired. "Hey," one of the police whispered to Mike, "that key, isn't it from the judge's office?" Mike laughed nervously. "Of course, face. This fat must have taken some keychain. Probably doesn't even know what it is." But his confidence was cracking, because Robert was no longer behaving like someone waiting to be answered. He was behaving like someone who was about to serve other people. Margaret Walsh watched everything from the window when Sandra appeared beside her. "Margaret, can you do me a favor? When it all starts, could you shoot discreetly? For the court archives, of course." "Sandra, what's going on?" "Justice," Sandra answered simply. "Poetic justice." Robert kept his cell phone and began walking toward the main entrance. His posture had changed completely. There was nothing more submissive or embarrassed in their movements. He walked like someone who was going home. Mike saw him approaching and prepared for another round of humiliation. "Look who came back. I thought you had finally understood the message and gone away." "In fact," Robert said, stopping exactly 3 meters from Mike, "I was just waiting for the right time." He checked the clock one last time, and that moment has come. Something in Robert's tone made all the gifts silent. The journalists stopped moving their equipment. The other police officers stopped laughing. Margaret Walsh held her breath. "Right time for what, Gordo?" Mike asked, but his voice had lost all the previous confidence. Robert smiled, the same smile that had ice cream Margaret earlier. "To assume my new position as a judge of this court." He paused, watching the color drain from Mike's face. "The inauguration ceremony was last week, but today is my first day at work." The silence that followed was absolute. Mike opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The other police officers took a step back instinctively. The journalists raised their cameras with wide eyes. "And now, official Reeves," Robert continued, his voice gaining all the authority he had kept hidden, "I need you to hide me to my room. We have a lot to talk about: professional behavior and respect." What no one knew was that Robert Chen had planned this moment for weeks, waiting patiently to teach a lesson that would echo through the corridors of that court forever. The silence in the courtyard of the court was deafening. Mike Reeves was stopped, his brain struggling to process what he had just heard. You're kidding, right?" His voice came out like a strangled whisper. Robert Chen slowly took the golden key out of her pocket, holding her at Mike's eyes. "This is the key to the main cabinet, official Reeves. The same as Judge Harrison handed me at the inauguration ceremony last week." His voice echoed through the courtyard with absolute authority. "No, this can't be happening," Mike murmured, sweat starting to drain with his forehead. The other police officers took several steps back, as if Mike had contracted a contagious disease. "Sandra!" Robert called toward the entrance. The secretary immediately appeared, as if waiting for that moment for decades. "Please inform everyone that the first audience will start in 2 minutes, and bring the file of the official Reeves." "What file?" Mike stammered, his arrogance evaporating like water in the desert. Margaret Walsh left the building holding a thick paste. "This file, official." She handed the documents to Robert with a smile that mixed admiration and satisfaction. "Complaints of inadequate conduct of the last 6 months. 12 documented cases of abuse of authority." Robert fluffed his pages calmly, as if reading a menu. "Interesting. Insults based on physical appearance, socioeconomic discrimination, excessive use of authority." He raised his eyes to Mike. "Looks like you have a standard official, Reeves." The journalists were filming everything, their cameras capturing every drop of sweat on Mike's face, every second of his public humiliation. One of them whispered to the cameraman, "Don't stop shooting. This will be a national headline." "Your Excellency," Sandra said with poorly contained pleasure, "the representative of the police union is coming," and Captain Morrison was also notified. Mike felt his legs weakened. Captain Morrison was known for not tolerating public scandals. "Judge Chen, I didn't know if I knew who you were." "Ah, so the problem is that you didn't know who I was?" Robert interrupted, his sharp voice like a blade. "That means if I were really just an ordinary man, obese, would it be acceptable to treat me that way?" The question stopped in the air like a death sentence. Mike opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had dug his own grave with his own words. "Official Reeves," Robert continued, now talking to all autoridad and judicial that had kept hidden, "you told me to wait outside with the other suspects. I said I had face of those who eat hamburger at breakfast. I suggested I should take a walk for my health." Each phrase fell on Mike like a hammer. The other police officers looked at him with disgust and fear, already physically distancing himself. Sandra was radiant, Margaret filmed discreetly, and journalists captured every moment of the destruction of a career. "Your exact words were, 'People like you always get a problem.' Can you explain what you mean by people like me?" Mike was shaking now. I expressed myself bad. That's not what I meant." "Don't express yourself badly, official. You left your true opinions very clear." Robert stored the folder and walked to face with Mike. "For 25 years as a lawyer and 5 as a judge, I dedicated my career to fight exactly the kind of prejudice you showed today." Captain Morrison arrived at that moment, his expression already showing that he had been brief about the situation. "Judge Chen, on behalf of the department, Captain Morrison," Robert greeted him with respectful nod, "I believe we have a situation that requires immediate action." Mike looked desperately to his superior, but found only coldness. The captain did not even greet him. "Official Reeves," Robert has continued, "you are fired from the security function of this court immediately. In addition, I will be forwarding this case for internal investigation for discrimination and abuse of authority." "Please," Mike begged, his voice breaking. "I have family. I need this job." Robert stopped, turned slowly and said with a devastating calm, "You may have thought of it before judging a book by the cover." Margaret Walsh whispered to Sandra, "He just quoted the own lesson he needed to learn." The moment was cinematic. Robert Chen, the man who had been called Fordo and sent waiting out, was now standing in the same place where he was humiliated, dressed in the authority he always had, while his oppressor begged for mercy. The camera's flashes captured the perfect image. Justice personified in the figure of a man who turned prejudice into power, humiliation into victory, and arrogance into repentance. 3 months later, the Riverside Court of Justice had become a national symbol of justice and respect. Robert Chen transformed not only his own trajectory, but the entire culture of that institution. Its history had viralized on social networks, generating millions of views and inspiring people around the world. Mike Reeves, on the other hand, faced the devastating consequences of his arrogance. Dismissed by the court, investigated by the internal department, and with his publicly destroyed reputation, he struggled to find any work in the security area. The video of his humiliation had more than 5 million views on YouTube, eternalizing his shame. "No one wants to hire the prejudiced policeman," Mike confessed to his wife in a conversation that leaked to the local press. "My career ended up because of 5 minutes of stupidity." Meanwhile, Robert had implemented a revolutionary discrimination training program for all court officials. Sandra Martinez, promoted to administrative supervisor, personally led the awareness sessions. "What happened that day," Sandra explained to new employees, "proved that respect is not optional, it's critical, and we never know who is on the other side of our interaction." Margaret Walsh had become one of the court's most respected lawyers, often citing the Chen case in his professional dignity lectures. "I witnessed a man transform humiliation into power through patience and wisdom," she told law students. "It was the most powerful lesson about justice I've ever seen." Judge Chen's office had become a sanctuary of equity. His decisions were marked by a special sensitivity to cases of discrimination and prejudice. Lawyers from all over the state asked to act in their court, knowing that they would find true impartiality. One afternoon, Robert received a letter that deeply thrilled him. It was from a young plus-size lawyer from Chicago who had seen the video of his revenge. Senor Chen, your example gave me the courage to never accept less respect than I deserve. Today, I defend others who go through what we go through. It was exactly the kind of impact Robert expected to create. His victory had not just been personal, it had been a war for all who have already been tried by appearance. During an interview for a national program, Robert was asked about his sentiment in relation to Mike Reeves. "I don't feel angry," responded with the same calm that he had demonstrated that fateful day. "I feel sorry. He missed an opportunity to meet an amazing person just because he judged me for his appearance. The loss was his, not mine." The court had become a model of inclusion. Employees of all physical types worked in harmony, and cases of discrimination were treated with zero tolerance. Robert had created a legacy that transcended his own experience. Mike Reeves, now working as a night security at a mall, watched from far away the news about Robert's success. In times of brutal honesty, he admitted to himself that he had learned the most expensive lesson in his life: never judge a book by the cover. "If I could go back in time," Mike confessed in a rare interview months later, "I would have treated that man with the respect that every human being deserves. My arrogance destroyed my life and made me lose a chance to meet an extraordinary person." The last scene in Robert Chen's history took place at an undergraduate ceremony at the local law school, where he was invited as the main speaker. Faced with hundreds of future lawyers, he concluded his speech with words that echoed by the auditorium. "True justice does not come from revenge, but from transformation. Do not allow the prejudice of others to define its value. And most importantly, never use your position to reduce someone because you never know who this person really is or what they can become." The applause was deafening. At the bottom of the auditorium, Sandra Martinez wiped tears of pride. Margaret Walsh smiled widely, remembering that transforming day. And somewhere in town, Mike Reeves watched on television, forever carrying the lesson that arrogance always charges its price. Robert Chen had proved that the best revenge is really success, and that dignity and respect are universal rights, not appearance-based privileges. If this story of overcoming injustice has inspired you, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and share with those who need to remember that we should never judge anyone for appearance, because everyone deserves respect and dignity.